The boy in the store window. The sky above Los Angeles Mall shimmered with the late afternoon glow, the sun dipping low as golden beams poured across the polished floors and glass windows. Shoppers walked with bags in hand. Music played faintly from overhead speakers, and the smell of fresh pretzels wafted through the air. Near the heart of the mall, beside a luxury fashion boutique with gold lettering and velvet ropes, a small group of teenagers stood laughing. Too loud, too carefree, too cruel. One of them, Jackson, had the swagger of someone who believed the world owed him something. His shoes gleamed, his designer jacket cost more than most rent payments, and his voice, sharp with sarcasm, echoed across the wide corridor. "Yo, check that guy out," Jackson said, pointing at a man near the corner bench. "Is that Keanu Reeves? Nah, can't be. No way he'd be caught wearing that, whatever that is." His friends turned. There he was, a man in worn jeans, a black hoodie, and old leather boots. His beard unkempt, his hair loosely tied back. He held a small paper bag and a coffee, his face calm, his eyes thoughtful. The man looked around, watching people pass like he was taking in a story no one else saw. Jackson laughed louder. "Maybe he's filming another homeless guy role. Someone should toss him $1. The group burst into laughter, unaware that just a few steps behind them a store clerk in a sharp suit froze. His eyes darted toward the man on the bench and widened. Sir, that really is Keanu Reeves." The teens paused. Jackson raised an eyebrow. "What? You serious?" "Yes," the clerk whispered, nervous now. "I saw him here last month, too. He bought coffee from our cafe. Didn't even ask for a discount." Jackson scoffed. "So what? Rich guy slumming it for fun? Please. If I had his money, I wouldn't dress like I lost a bet." As if on cue, Keanu stood up slowly, walked toward the boutique, and paused by the glass. He didn't look at the teens. He simply gazed at the display inside. A leather jacket sat on a mannequin. The price tag was discreet, but shocking. $6,000. Jackson smirked. "You think he can afford that?" A few passers-by started to gather. Whispers spread. People recognized him. Phones came out. The security guard nearby straightened his vest, unsure whether to approach or bow. Keanu stepped forward, calm, collected, kind. He opened the boutique door and stepped inside. The manager rushed over, beaming. "Mr. Reeves, welcome. Please, anything you need." Jackson's voice called from the entrance. "Yo, Keanu, need me to spot you a few bucks for that jacket?" The mall went quiet. Keanu turned. Slowly, he looked at Jackson, not with anger, not with pride. Just a calm silence that seemed to stretch into forever. "No, thank you," Keanu said gently. "I was actually thinking of buying the entire store." The words struck like lightning. "Excuse me?" the manager stammered. Keanu nodded. "I've been watching this place for a while. The staff here is respectful. I like that. But I also saw the way some people treat others around here." Jackson's face turned red. His friends slowly backed away. "I want to buy the store," Keanu continued, "and make a few changes, starting with how people are treated no matter what they wear." The manager blinked. You're serious?" Keanu smiled softly. "Very." There was a long pause, then movement. The manager ushered Keanu into a back room, while the teens were left standing at the entrance. A few bystanders gave them looks of quiet judgment. Someone murmured, "You messed with the wrong guy." Jackson tried to laugh it off. "He's bluffing. No way he's buying a whole store, that's just a stunt." But deep down, something in him shook. Because in Keanu's eyes, he hadn't seen a man trying to impress anyone. He'd seen a man who had already been through more than most could survive, and come out the other side with humility. Keanu sat across from the manager in the office. He placed a check on the table. The number was exact, and the name on the account wasn't a company, wasn't a foundation, just Keanu Reeves. "Why?" the manager asked, stunned. "Because respect shouldn't be reserved for those who look like they have money," Keanu said. "Sometimes the Ones who look like they have nothing are the ones who have the most. As news spread, the mall buzzed. Whispers of kindness, of quiet power, of humility and action. Reporters hadn't arrived yet, but soon they would. And somewhere outside, Jackson sat on a bench, face in his hands, wondering how a joke had turned into a lesson he'd never forget. But this was only the beginning, because Keanu wasn't done. Not even close. He had a plan, and what happened next would shake the city to its core. A lesson behind glass, the sun had fully dipped below the skyline, casting long shadows across the mall's marble floor. Artificial lights flickered on, giving the shops a soft golden glow. Keanu Reeves stood behind the counter of the boutique, not as a customer anymore, but as its new owner. The purchase had gone through in less than an hour. He didn't need a boardroom or a legal team present. He didn't call for press or use the moment for publicity. He simply wrote a check, shook the manager's hand, and asked the staff to stay. What surprised them most was what he said next. "This store is not about the clothes anymore," Keanu told the team who gathered near the counter, still in disbelief. "From now on, this will be a place that welcomes everyone with dignity, no matter what they wear, no matter how much money they have in their wallet. If someone walks in with kindness, they'll be treated like royalty." The employees looked at one another. One of them, an older woman named Carmen who had worked there for 12 years, felt tears in her eyes. She had seen too many customers treated better than her simply because they wore wealth like armor. This was different. This was hope. Keanu didn't leave that night. Instead, he rolled up his sleeves, took off his jacket, and began moving things around. He walked through each section of the boutique, not criticizing but observing. He asked the team what they thought, where they saw problems, how they felt when certain customers entered, and then he listened. He truly listened. Carmen told him how a young boy had once come in to ask about a gift for his mother and was laughed at by a former employee. Another clerk mentioned how teenagers were often shooed away because they didn't look like buyers. Keanu nodded, making mental notes. Every story added another stone to the foundation he was quietly building. Meanwhile, outside the glass, Jackson returned. But this time, he didn't walk in. He stood by the window, arms crossed, watching. He saw Keanu behind the counter laughing, with staff, lifting a mannequin with one arm, joking about how even these fake people are stiff in here. He watched as an elderly man in a frayed coat hesitated at the door, and Keanu personally walked over, opened it, and said, "You're welcome here, always." Then he guided the man inside, helped him sit down, and asked him if he'd like something warm to drink. Jackson clenched his jaw. He had always been told that power meant showing off, being louder, richer, and more dominant. But this wasn't noise. This was strength through stillness. It was everything he wasn't, and it terrified him more than he could explain. His friends had left. They didn't want to stick around after being embarrassed. But Jackson stayed. He couldn't stop watching. Inside, Keanu told the staff that the boutique would reopen in 3 days under a new name, Window of Respect. The name had come from something he noticed, how people often judged from the outside, peering in, assuming they knew what someone was worth by what they wore or how they walked. Keanu wanted to flip that idea on its head. The store wouldn't hide behind status. It would invite stories, embrace flaws, and encourage kindness. He made another surprising move. Keanu announced that every weekend, for 1 hour, the store would allow anyone to come in and choose one item, completely free of charge. No questions asked, no income tests, just one rule. They had to share a story about someone they looked up to. The idea was simple, to remind people that value was not sewn into fabric, but in memories, in lessons, and in humanity. The staff thought he was joking at first, but he wasn't. By the next morning, word had spread like wildfire. Blogs picked it up, then local news stations, then international outlets. Keanu Reeves buys boutique, turns it into kindness hub. One headline read. Another said, Hollywood star flips fashion store to fight judgment with humility. But none of this mattered to Keanu. The only thing he cared about was the people who walked through the door. Jackson finally returned home that night, but he couldn't sleep. He lay in bed staring at the ceiling, wondering why the moment kept replaying in his head. His mocking tone, Keanu's calm response, the way no one had defended him. He kept thinking about that older man who was invited inside and how his own father, now out of work, had started wearing older clothes. Jackson remembered how embarrassed he'd been walking beside him last week. He hadn't spoken to his dad since. He didn't like who he was becoming. By the next day, Jackson found himself back at the mall. This time he wore simple jeans and a hoodie, no designer logos, no loud jewelry. He stood near the window, unsure if he had the courage to enter. A few people recognized him, but no one greeted him like they used to. Their stares were different now. Cautious. Unimpressed. Some even turned away. For the first time in his life, Jackson felt invisible. The boutique was still under renovation, but Keanu was inside, sweeping the floor with Carmen. He saw Jackson. Their eyes met. Keanu didn't wave. He didn't smirk. He simply nodded. Once. Jackson blinked, and then Keanu turned away and kept sweeping. For Jackson, that nod was heavier than any insult. It said everything. I saw what you did. I won't shame you. But I also won't invite you in. Not yet. That moment sat like a weight on Jackson's chest. He walked away. Not because he was angry, but because he finally understood that respect was not something you demanded. It was something you earned. And for the first time in his life, Jackson wanted to earn it. But he had no idea just how much that decision would cost him. The cost of change. The morning air was thick with the scent of roasted coffee and fresh pastries, and inside the newly transformed boutique, now known as Window of Respect, a soft energy flowed through every corner of the store. The walls, once lined with mirrors to reflect the beauty of clothes, now displayed framed letters from customers, stories of resilience, of gratitude, of change. Beneath each story hung an item of clothing once considered luxury, now redefined, not by price but by purpose. Soft lighting, wooden floors, and warm music gave the place a feeling less like a store and more like a sanctuary for the misunderstood. It was only the second day after the rebranding, and yet people from across the city were already lining up to step inside. Not for the brand, but for the experience Keanu Reeves had created from nothing but empathy. Keanu stood by the counter, dressed the same as always, old jeans, a black shirt, boots that had walked through more cities than most people had dreamed of. He listened to a single mom tell the story of how her daughter gave up her birthday to donate her gifts to a local shelter. Keanu didn't rush her. When she was done, he asked her what she wanted. She hesitated, then picked a simple gray blazer. For job interviews, she said softly. Keanu smiled, thanked her for her story, and handed her the blazer with both hands as if giving away a treasure. Outside the store, Jackson watched again. It had become a habit now, standing just out of reach, observing from behind glass. He hadn't spoken to Keanu since that single heavy nod 2 days ago, but something inside him had shifted. He wasn't sure what he wanted yet. Redemption, forgiveness, or just a chance to feel worthy of stepping inside. The boy who once wore pride like armor now wore guilt like a shadow. But life doesn't wait for self-reflection to be complete. Before it tests you. Jackson returned home that evening to find his father sitting on the porch, his shoulders slouched in a way Jackson had never seen before. The man who once built houses with his hands, who worked 15-hour shifts without complaint, now stared at the ground like it had betrayed him. They closed the plant, his father said, voice flat. Everyone let go. Just like that. For a long time, neither of them spoke. Then his father turned to him, eyes filled with something Jackson hadn't expected. Shame. I know I've been a burden lately. I know you've been embarrassed. But I just want you to know. I tried, I really did. The words struck harder than anything Jackson had felt in months. Without saying a word, he stood up, walked into the house, and returned holding a wrapped box, one he had bought weeks ago for himself. Inside was a luxury belt from a brand his father had once admired. It still had the tag on it. Jackson sat beside his father and handed it to him. His father looked confused. "What's this?" Jackson's voice cracked. "Something I should have given you sooner." That night, Jackson couldn't sleep. The guilt kept him awake. But something else stirred, an idea. Not for attention, not to win favor. For once, it was just an honest desire to make things right. The next morning, he returned to Window of Respect, but not alone. He brought with him 5 students from his school, each of them kids who had been mocked for their clothes, overlooked at events, made to feel small in a world obsessed with appearances. One girl, Lila, had worn the same shoes for 2 years. Another, Daniel, shared a backpack with his younger brother. They didn't know Jackson well. They certainly didn't trust him. But when he asked them if they'd come with him to the boutique, he said something none of them expected. "I want you to be seen." When they arrived, the store had a modest line as usual. Keanu stood near the entrance, greeting people. His eyes caught Jackson's immediately, then the kids beside him. He didn't smile. He didn't frown. He simply opened the door and stepped aside, letting them enter without a word. Inside, Jackson explained to the clerk that his friends wanted to participate in the 1-hour kindness hour, where people could share a story and receive something in return. One by one, the teens told their stories. Daniel spoke about helping his mother walk home every night from her late cleaning shift. Layla shared how she saved her lunch money for months to buy her brother a winter coat. Each story was raw, unrehearsed, and deeply moving. Even the staff paused to listen. And then Keanu approached them. "Thank you," he said quietly. "You reminded everyone here today that kindness is not something you wait for, it's something you give." Then he turned to Jackson. The room went still. "Why did you bring them here?" Keanu asked, his tone neither accusing nor warm. Jackson met his eyes. For the first time, he didn't flinch or look away. "Because I didn't deserve to be seen by you the other day," he said, voice steady. "But they do. And if anything good can come from what I did, it should start with them." There was a silence that felt like a storm about to pass. And then Keanu did something no one expected. He placed a hand on Jackson's shoulder. "We don't grow by hiding our shame," he said. "We grow when we use it to build something better." Jackson blinked fast. He didn't cry, but it was close. Keanu continued. "The store needs volunteers for Saturday mornings. No pay. Just presence. You in?" "Yes," Jackson said before the sentence finished. As the teens chose their items and hugged one another, with shy smiles, Jackson stood quietly in the back of the store, watching them feel something he had taken for granted most of his life. Dignity. But change never comes without resistance. Outside, an older man in a suit paced angrily near the edge of the boutique. He spoke harshly into a phone, pointing toward the store's name, shaking his head. Jackson noticed him. So did Keanu. It was Raymond Parks, the previous owner of the boutique before it had been sold off to investors. And he did not like what Keanu had done to his legacy. Something was coming. And the next chapter in this story would not be written in soft moments of healing. It would be a storm. And Keanu knew it. The storm at the door. The sun rose slowly over the city as warm golden light washed over the glass windows of Window of Respect. Inside, the store hummed with quiet joy. A mother helped her teenage son try on a blazer for his first school debate. A teacher from the local public school browsed jackets for underprivileged students she promised to surprise. And in the back, Jackson swept the floor silently, nodding to guests and checking the donation rack without being asked. He had become a regular face, not as the rich teen who once mocked, but as the young man who now listened more than he spoke. Each Saturday, he showed up before the doors opened. Each time he left with his shirt stained with dust and his hands sore but his spirit lighter. Slowly, day by day, the story around him began to change. Keanu Reeves watched it all unfold with the calm grace of a man who had already walked through enough storms in life to know when one was brewing. He hadn't forgotten the man outside, the boutique, Raymond Parks, the former owner, the businessman whose empire of status-driven luxury had been dismantled in a single act of humility. Raymond had returned every day since, each time angrier than before. And though he never entered the store, His eyes burned with the bitterness of a man who couldn't understand why the world had turned to honor compassion over control. One Wednesday morning, the storm broke. A thick envelope arrived at the boutique addressed to Keanu. Inside was a cease and desist letter stamped by a powerful law firm. It claimed that the store's new charitable model violated contractual conditions of the commercial lease agreement. It accused Keanu of lowering the prestige and economic value of the shopping wing by offering free items and encouraging non-consumer-based visitation. In short, they wanted him out. Keanu read the letter slowly, then folded it and placed it on the counter. He didn't sigh. He didn't rage. Instead, he turned to Carmen, who had just arrived to open the storeroom. "We may have a battle coming," he said simply, "but we'll face it the same way we do everything here, with dignity." That night, a meeting was called in the boutique. The staff, now a close-knit team bound by purpose, sat in a circle on chairs pulled from every corner of the store. Keanu explained the situation. Some were angry, some were scared. Carmen clenched her hands and asked, "What happens if they succeed?" "Then we move," Keanu said calmly. "Not backwards, just somewhere else. Kindness doesn't depend on location, it depends on people." But Jackson didn't want to hear that. He had just begun to feel like he was part of something good, something real. And now some bitter man in a suit was going to ruin it? No, not again. Not this time. That evening, he went home and searched everything he could find about Raymond Parks. He read old articles, interviews, tax filings. He learned about how Raymond built his brand by selling exclusivity, how he once had a customer removed for wearing a hoodie, how he gave out scholarships, but only to students from wealthy families. The deeper Jackson dug, the clearer the picture became. Raymond didn't want the boutique back. He wanted to erase the memory of what it had become. Because to him, what Keanu had created was not inspiring. It was insulting. The next day, Jackson returned to the boutique with a fire in his heart. He sat with Keanu before the doors opened and asked, "Why don't you fight him back publicly? Call out what he's doing." Keanu looked up from the display he was organizing and gave a small, tired smile. "Because fighting fire with fire just leaves everything burned. I'm not interested in winning, I'm interested in standing." Jackson paused, frustrated but respectful. "Then let me stand for you." Keanu studied him. "Are you sure you understand what that means?" "No," Jackson admitted, "but I'm willing to find out." And so it began. That evening, Jackson posted a video online, not polished, not rehearsed, just his voice, raw and honest, shot from his phone in the quiet corner of the boutique. "I used to think success was about being seen," he said, his voice soft but steady. "But then I met someone who didn't care about being seen. He cared about seeing others. His name is Keanu Reeves, and he turned this boutique into something beautiful. But now, someone's trying to shut it down, and I can't stay silent." The video spread like wildfire. Within hours, comments poured in. Hundreds, then thousands. People shared stories of what the boutique had done for them. Parents, veterans, students, janitors, retirees, each with a memory of kindness that had reached them when they needed it most. Hashtags began trending. Window of respect. Stand with Keanu. Kindness matters. News outlets picked it up. Celebrities began resharing the video. Some even arrived at the mall the next day, quietly without cameras, just to shake Keanu's hand. Raymond Parks saw it all, and it enraged him. He returned to the mall in person, this time with a lawyer and a photographer in tow. He marched into the boutique for the first time since its transformation, and his presence changed the air instantly. The staff froze. Customers stepped aside, but Keanu stood still, calm as ever. "Mr. Reeves," Raymond said, voice like ice, "this is not a soup kitchen. This is a luxury wing. Your antics have gone far enough." Keanu didn't blink. "What you call antics, others call hope. You're violating your lease. Then we'll talk in court." Raymond leaned closer. "You think your reputation will protect you? I built this mall. Keanu stepped forward, closing the space between them with quiet strength. You may have built it, but that doesn't mean you own the hearts that walk through it, and if you want to take something from me, Raymond, you'll have to take it in front of everyone you've ever looked down on. A silence hung like thunder. Then, Raymond turned and stormed out. The next day, a crowd showed up at the boutique, not for discounts, not for attention, but to stand. They held signs that read, "Kindness is priceless," and "We are not a risk to your profit." Parents brought their children. Veterans wore their uniforms. Even homeless visitors showed up, not asking for anything but offering thanks. Inside the store, Keanu stood near the window, eyes full of quiet awe. Beside him, Jackson whispered, "You didn't fight back. You stood up, and people followed." Keanu nodded, but then said something unexpected. "They're following the idea, not me, and that's exactly how it should be." But even as the community rallied and the boutique overflowed with support, Keanu knew this wasn't over. Legal pressure was building. Threats became letters, letters became calls, and behind those calls was a man with money, power, and a bitter ego. Something was going to break, and the question now wasn't whether the store would survive. It was whether Keanu's quiet strength could hold fast through a storm louder than any he had faced before. The silence before the verdict, the rain fell for 3 straight days. Soft at first, then heavier until the streets shimmered with reflections of headlights and distant city signs. The mall, usually bustling with noise and color, grew strangely quiet beneath the gray skies. It was the kind of weather that made people stay home, made them reflect, made them remember. Inside window of respect, however, the mood was anything but dull. The storm outside was nothing compared to the one approaching inside. The boutique had become more than a store now. It was a movement. People traveled from distant neighborhoods, some even flying in from other cities, not to shop but to witness. They came for what Keanu had built, a place where compassion outweighed cash, where stories were worth more than style, and where pain didn't make you invisible. Each visitor left with more than just a piece of clothing. They left with a memory of being seen, heard, respected, but not everyone celebrated it. Behind the scenes, Raymond Parks moved swiftly. The legal machinery was grinding to life, and Keanu's team had received notice of a court hearing scheduled for the following week. The mall's management, pressured by Raymond's influence and financial threats, issued a final warning. Either Window of Respect ceased its 1-hour kindness program, or it would face immediate eviction proceedings for non-commercial activity violating lease compliance. Keanu gathered the staff that evening. They met in the storeroom, which had been transformed into a cozy space with donated chairs, blankets, and a chalkboard filled with notes from grateful visitors. The energy in the room was tense. Jackson sat near the door, his fists clenched, his jaw tight. Carmen looked exhausted but calm, like someone who had weathered storms before and learned to breathe through them. "We don't have to stop what we're doing," Keanu said gently. "But continuing comes with consequences," a younger staff member asked quietly. "Will we lose the store?" Keanu paused, then answered with complete honesty. "Maybe, but we'll never lose the reason we created it." The next day, without any press, without any public announcement, Keanu did something no one expected. He removed every luxury item from the store's display windows. No designer coats, no gold-lined handbags, no expensive shoes. Instead, he asked visitors and volunteers to write words of kindness, change, or memory on simple pieces of paper. Hundreds came in, filling each window with letters, sketches, and thank you notes. Within hours, the boutique looked less like a storefront and more like a tribute wall, a living story of what kindness could build when given space to grow. Jackson watched in awe. The boy who had once believed power came from appearance now saw a different kind of power, one rooted in presence. He hadn't told anyone yet, but that week he started therapy for the first time in his life. Not because anyone told him to, but because something in him whispered, "You've hurt people. You've hurt yourself. It's time to understand why." As the court day approached, the media returned. Reporters crowded outside the boutique, eager for headlines. They wanted confrontation, drama, a fall from grace. But Keanu refused to give them that. He stood beside his staff, welcomed visitors with the same soft smile, and declined every interview. When asked how he felt about the possible shutdown, he only replied, "The kindness doesn't live in this building. It lives in us." Behind closed doors, though, Keanu had made one final move, one that no one knew about. Late at night, he contacted a quiet group of investors and community leaders, people who had benefited from the boutique's mission but stayed silent out of fear of backlash. He asked not for money but for space, somewhere outside the mall, somewhere permanent where the movement could live freely, without legal chains around its heart. One man offered an abandoned library, another offered an old post office. The plan was forming, but he hadn't told the team yet. Not because he was hiding it, but because he wanted them to understand something deeper. Sometimes, he told himself, you don't fight to keep what you've built, you fight to prove it was worth building. On the morning of the hearing, Jackson showed up early. He wore the same hoodie he had on the day he mocked Keanu, not out of shame but to remind himself of who he had been, and how far he still had to go. He stood beside Carmen, now wearing a blouse gifted by one of the boutique's visitors, and together, the staff walked into the courthouse behind Keanu, not as employees, but as witnesses to something larger than all of them. The courtroom was quiet, polished, cold. Raymond Parks sat on one side with his legal team, dressed in a crisp black suit that looked untouched by time or struggle. His expression was sharp, impatient, as if kindness were a virus he had come to cure. Across from him sat Keanu, unshaven, composed, dressed in the same old black jacket he always wore. No tie, no performance, just presence. The judge, an older woman with eyes that missed nothing, listened to the arguments. Raymond's lawyer painted a picture of chaos. A store turned into a circus, lost revenue, brand devaluation. He used words like liability and commercial dilution. Keanu's response was brief. He didn't bring a lawyer. He stood alone, looked the judge in the eye and said, "This boutique has become a space for dignity. If the price of kindness is inconvenience to the mall's brand, then perhaps the brand was built on the wrong foundation." There was no applause, just silence. A silence so loud that even Raymond seemed smaller in it. The judge requested a recess. Outside, the courthouse crowds gathered, not with signs or chants, but with candles, photos, letters of thanks. Some held up clothing items they had received from the boutique, not to show off, but to say, "This saved me." Others came simply to be part of something bigger than themselves. The atmosphere was not of protest, but of reverence. That evening, as the sky turned a deep purple and the courthouse lights dimmed, Keanu stood outside on the steps, waiting for the decision. Jackson stood beside him. "What if we lose?" he asked softly. Keanu looked ahead, face unreadable. "Then we start again and we do it better." Jackson nodded. "I want to be part of that, no matter what." And just then, a court clerk stepped outside, paper in hand, eyes scanning the crowd. "Mr. Reeves?" he called out. Keanu turned. The clerk handed him the verdict, and as Keanu unfolded the page, the world seemed to hold its breath. What we leave behind, the paper in Keanu's hands felt heavier than it should have, as if the weight of every moment that led to this one was stitched into its edges. He didn't rush to read it. Instead, he took a breath, raised his eyes to the quiet sea of faces around him and let the moment stretch. People waited with nervous silence, their eyes wide, some gripping the hands of strangers, unified by the quiet hope that this one place, this boutique built not with luxury but with love, would be allowed to stay. Jackson stood just behind Keanu, his heart pounding in his chest. For the first time in his life, he understood what it meant to care about something beyond himself. The boy who once laughed for attention now waited with trembling fingers, praying for a second chance, not just for a store, but for a truth he had only just begun to grasp. Keanu finally lowered his gaze and read the verdict. He didn't flinch. His face didn't break. He simply nodded once slowly and folded the paper with deliberate care. Then he turned to the crowd and said in a voice steady and unshaken, "We've been given 30 days to vacate." A collective gasp moved through the people like a breeze. Someone in the back whispered, "No." Another cried out, "But why?" Keanu held up his hand, not to quiet them, but to offer peace. "We weren't silenced," he said. "We were simply reminded that some doors close, but that doesn't mean the story ends." Reporters rushed forward with cameras, questions flying. "What will you do next? Will you appeal? How do you feel about Raymond Parks winning?" Keanu shook his head gently. This was never about winning or losing. It was about showing what was possible. And we did that. Now we take what we've learned and we build again. This time bigger, freer. The next day the boutique didn't close. It opened its doors wider. The staff decided to make every day count. People poured in. More stories were shared. More letters were pinned to the window. They started calling the wall the living page, a place where people's truths were honored in ink. Carmen curated a section dedicated to transformation, stories, and Jackson volunteered to design a digital archive so nothing would be lost even if the building disappeared. For 30 days, Window of Respect became more alive than ever. And then, something unexpected happened. In the second week, a woman named Valerie showed up at the boutique. No one recognized her. She wore a simple coat, her gray hair pinned back, her hands trembling slightly as she held a folder. She asked to speak with Keanu. They sat near the back of the store beside a rack of coats donated by a retired Navy officer. "I used to work for Raymond Parks," she said quietly. "For years. I was his operations manager. I left after I got sick and he never returned my calls, never helped. But I've been watching what you're doing and I still have something, a contract, from the original purchase agreement. It was never filed properly." Keanu frowned. "What do you mean?" She opened the folder. Inside was a copy of the lease, an older version, one that included a clause added last minute during the sale. It allowed for temporary charitable programs under the store's discretion, provided they caused no harm to the mall's operation. It had been overlooked in court. "This," Valerie said, "could change everything." Keanu didn't jump with joy. He didn't rush to announce it. Instead, he held her hand gently, thanked her, and said, "You didn't just bring a paper. You brought something back that shouldn't have been lost. Your voice." They sent the document to the legal board. Within 3 days, a new hearing was scheduled. This time, Raymond was not smug. This time, Keanu walked in, not with defiance but with quiet certainty. He presented the clause, explained its intent, and reminded the court that every activity held within the boutique had caused no harm, only healing. When the judge reviewed it, her face remained unreadable. Then, after a pause that felt like a century, she set down the file and said, "Mr. Reeves, you have every legal right to continue your program. The store will remain open." Outside, cheers erupted. People hugged, some cried. Carmen held her hand over her mouth, overwhelmed, and Jackson, still standing near the back, closed his eyes and let a single tear fall. Keanu stepped outside and addressed the crowd, not with triumph, but with gratitude. "This was never about me," he said. "This was about proving that places like this can exist, that kindness isn't weakness, that we don't need permission to care for one another. We just need the will." Raymond never returned to the boutique again. In the months that followed, Window of Respect expanded. Donations increased. They opened a second location in the abandoned library downtown. They started hosting workshops for young people, teaching empathy, listening, storytelling. Jackson led the first youth circle. His voice trembled, but he spoke. Anyway. "We don't need to be perfect to be good," he said. "We just need to be willing to change." People remembered that line. They printed it on the wall in big letters right above the register. And Keanu? He kept showing up. Same clothes, same presence. Sweeping floors, lifting boxes, shaking hands, listening. Someone asked him once why. He still did it. He smiled and said, "Because when you plant a seed, you don't walk away. You stay, you water it, you wait. And then one day, you see the roots. And so the boutique stayed, not just in the mall, but in the lives it touched, and long after the last luxury brand moved on. Window of Respect still stood, not as a store, but as a testament to humility, to redemption, to the quiet power of kindness that never asks for credit, but changes everything.